If you go ahead and update to the new Studio One 6.2, you're going to notice a new icon at the top here. This is the auto zoom feature. Now, if we look at my project at the moment, I'm zoomed in fairly close and I have to scroll around to get to different parts of the project. Now, sometimes it's really handy to be able to see the whole project at once. If I go ahead and click on that icon now, boom, we can now see the whole song in one view. Now, you've already been able to do that in Studio One, but the difference here is this is dynamic, meaning as we change the layout of our UI, we're still going to get to see the whole song in one view. So, for example, if I open up the Browse panel, you can see that we can still see the whole song. Open up the Inspector, we can still see the whole song. If I go ahead and I open something like the mixer here, we can still see the whole song. Now, I think I'm going to find this really handy, not so much in the early stages of a project where I'm still sort of recording things, more so in the mixing stage, okay, where I want to prioritize my console view, but it's really handy to get a whole kind of map of the song on screen so that I can see where different events are actually happening and sort of focus on them if I want to. Super handy feature in that way, in my opinion. Now, if you go up to that icon and you do a long click on it, you can see that there's a couple of different options. You can have the same behavior but zoom vertically, or the same behavior and zoom horizontally. Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. The new Studio One 6.2 is probably described as a minor update. However, for me, I feel it's pretty major. There's some nifty new features in here. Talking about minor and major, some of those features actually relate to scale. Here in the piano roll view, you've already been able to change the color of the notes that you can see. For example, at the moment, it's set up here to part at the moment, so they're all green because my part is green, as you can see at the top here. However, I've always been able to change this to pitch, for example, so I'll get different colors for different pitches, and also velocity, so we get different colors for different velocities. But new in 6.2 is this feature, or this choice, which is scale. Now, when I've selected this, all of my notes have turned to blue, you'll notice, and that's because they all belong to the scale that I've selected over here on the left, which is C major. Now, if I take one of these notes and drag it off to one of the black keys, you'll see that it turns red, and that's because this note does not belong to the C major scale. Now, it's fine to have notes in your music that don't belong to a particular scale, but it's really nice to get this visual indication here, okay? Just in case something has gone astray, you can miss notes which are out of tune, for example, in a really busy orchestral mix or something like that, and it's nice to have this visual reference. Now, just in case you don't know, you can also go over to the left here and actually select scale like so, and what that means is if I grab this note and I just drag it up and down, it's only going to let me drag it to notes within that scale. That's a super handy feature right there. Now, while we're in this piano roll view, I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard, that would be Command on Mac, and I'm going to use my mouse wheel to zoom in. You can see when you zoom into a certain point, you can actually see the note names, yeah, and you get this nice cursor behavior here. For example, if I hover over the top of a note, I can change the velocity, okay, by just dragging up and down, for example. If I go to the bottom, I can use that to split the notes, so yeah. Now, that's a great feature, very handy, but can also be annoying if you accidentally, for example, keep splitting notes when you just meant to grab them and drag them to a different place. So new in 6.2, you can actually change that behavior. If you look at the toolbar up here, we've got two different types of cursor. At the moment, it's on the extended cursor, but we can change it to a basic cursor, and that means that we're just using the cursor to drag notes around or change their length, etc. And if you want to quickly swap between the two, just press the number 1 on your keyboard and that behavior will change. You've already been able to copy plugins from one place to another in Studio One, maintaining their values, but now you can do it and maintain automation values. You can see on this piano here, I have this room reverb plugin in the inserts, and you can see at the top here in the tracks view, it's automation. I'm automating the room size parameter here. Now if I go down to this plugin and hold Alt on my keyboard, or if you're on the Mac, hold Option, and then drag it across to this organ part here, we've copied the actual plugin over. You can see it's appeared here, but it's also copied the automation. If I go up to the top up here and then display the automation for room size for this organ, you can see exactly the same automation occurs here. There's a special type of plugin in Studio One called an ARA or ARA type plugin, and these are plugins that are really good at working directly with events. Okay, the most familiar one to you is probably Melodyne, and when you go to add Melodyne, you probably either press Control M or Command M on Mac, or you could right click, go down to audio, and then click on edit with Melodyne. Okay, whichever way suits you. Well, there's a new way of doing it now. If you look over here in the browser, we're looking at our different effects, and there's a new folder right at the top called Event Editors. Okay, if we open that folder, you can see your ARA plugins in there, or event-based plugins in there. I've got Melodyne and Vocaline, and you can just grab it and drag it and drop it onto a clip. Really simple, just a different workflow. So in the past, as you may know, you've been able to select a couple of events right next to each other like so, press X on the keyboard, and it creates a nice crossfade between the two events. Okay, now normally the default size that it creates is just fine, but sometimes you want to adjust it yourself, so you can go in and drag the edges out like so, and then just sort of customize that to the length that you want the crossfade to be. Well, here's a different workflow if you end up doing that you might like to use, because now what you can do is actually just drag out a region across those two events there, yeah, to the length that you want the crossfade to be. Press X on the keyboard, and hey presto, you're all done. If you go to the bottom of the screen in Studio One and click on this little cog icon, you can see your recording options. I've got takes to layers selected. It's one of the things that you've been able to do for a long time in Studio One, and with that you can make several attempts at a recording, have them saved to layers, and then if we go to the top here, you can see on this track I can click on this icon and reveal the different layers. Then what you're able to do was kind of grab parts of this by dragging across, and that part will get promoted up to the main part that you can hear later on. This is something that we call comping. I'll put a link for a video I've made about that at the end of this video. So far that's all you've been able to really do with layers. However, with version 6.2, there's a few editing options available now that we didn't have. So for example, I could go to my split tool and split different sections, maybe use something like my erase tool here, yeah, get rid of parts if I want to. You can even use the bend tool. So what I'm going to do is just right click on this particular layer and then just make sure I'm showing my bend markers. I'll enable my bend tool by pressing 7. I can put in some bend markers and I can start to bend this audio. So there's a whole bunch of editing options available now for layers. You may have noticed that when you're playing one of your songs in Studio One and it gets to the end, if you don't stop it, it will just play for infinity. I guess infinity. I've never actually tested it, to be honest with you, and it'll do that even though you may have something like the end marker in here. Well, now in 6.2 you can right click on the end marker, you can click on this stop at marker, and then when you actually play your song like so, it will stop at that marker. Brilliant. Now these are just some of my favorite new features in Studio One 6.2, but there's a number of others that I haven't mentioned. I'll put a link for those in the description down below. Now one of the ones I did mention was the new tools in layers, okay, and as I mentioned, layers are really good for something called comping. If you don't know about comping yet, I really think you should. It can really help you in terms of recording your songs, and I've got a link to a video I made about that right here. Perhaps you'd like to watch it.